Hey everybody, this is Allie, and this is my first time I'm creating a video just for my brand new YouTube channel, which is exciting for me. And this really is about using Photoshop brushes and custom brushes, and I've actually created a whole set of atmospheric brushes that I'm pretty excited about. And for an example, I'm using this image that was a failure, and it's why I am not an astrophotographer. And let me explain the background of this image. So every year we go down to an event called Minis on the Dragon. It's at Fontana Village in the Smoky Mountains of North Carolina, and it centers around a road called Tail of the Dragon, which is an amazing road, and 500 or so minis come down there, and we have a blast. And this one year, my friend Craig has this car, this mini, its name is Helljumper, and I love taking pictures of this car, and Craig likes photography, and so he's also in our cabin, so it's easy to coordinate things. And we said, let's shoot Helljumper with the Milky Way. We did all the research. We looked at the photographer's ephemeris. We were on the Dark Skies site. I was all over Google Maps. I talked to a friend who's done this. I knew what time the Milky Way would be up, what direction to be shooting towards. I thought I knew everything. I did not know that the area we picked, which was a lovely valley off of Tail of the Dragon at what they call the Scenic Overlook, is also a valley that's got a river down below, which pretty much always has clouds. So we wake up at 3 in the morning, we get here, it's about 4 in the morning, and we've got clouds. And so there is a Milky Way here, but we can't see it. And I shot it anyway, but I've never really been happy with it. So I decided to create my Milky Way using my custom brushes. So here's how you do it. So the first thing I did was I cut the car out, and I put everything below it. And by putting everything below it, I won't put stars on top of the car. So this first layer, it's just a black layer, just shows me how I did my cutout. Now the next thing I did was what I call my base sky layer, and this is a very subtle gradient. You'll see it's a darker blue at the bottom, it goes to a lighter blue at the top, and to that gradient layer I turned it into a smart object, and I added a little bit of noise so that it would go, because this is a long exposure image, and I wanted it to go with the rest of the image and look more real. And then I added a low horizon glow, which is not uncommon, and it makes the image look a little prettier. I'm going to show you the next steps, but here I also added stars, and then I added my little Milky Way. And what this video is about is how to add these stars and these Milky Ways. And I'm using brushes that I created myself. I'm very excited about them. I've got cloud brushes, I've got rain brushes, I've got dust, snow, and I've got stars. So we're going to start this off with a blank layer, and I'm going to start with my white stars. And I'm going to call this small stars. Now I'm going to hit, I'm on Milky Way. I want stars white, and I'm going to hit, that's on my brush. And now I'm going to hit D for my default colors. I'm going to hit X, and now my front color is white. And this brush is designed to scatter stars of different sizes. They're all going to be white, and it just gives you a nice base layer of stars. One thing that happens a lot of times in astrophotography is the stars move a little bit. So I didn't put this into the brush because it'll depend on what you want to do, but I'm going to take a small little teeny weeny motion blur. I mean, that's way too much. This must have been from when I was playing with rain. There we go, just a tiny motion blur to make it look a little bit more like photographic stars. Now, I'm going to double click the layer, and I'm going to click on the outer glow. And the outer glow, see how it puts a little bit, and I've chosen to do like a blue outer glow, but I think it's too much, so I'm going to bring the opacity down until I can see that my stars are just kind of creating a little bit of glow without too much. So I'm going to leave it at about 10. It's just a little bit of glow. And I could choose like to change my star color to a yellow. I'm going to leave it a blue, but you can change the color here. I've got a blend mode screen, which means to show the lighter color. I can pull the opacity up a little bit if I want. If I pull the opacity up too much, that just looks crap. So I'm thinking somewhere around 10 or maybe 12 is good for the stars. So now I'm going to do a Command G, and that puts my stars layer into a folder, and I'm going to call it stars. This way, if I want to do global removals or masking later, everything's in a folder, and that gives me that control. I'm going to add another layer. And this layer, I'm going to choose my other brush, which is called Stars Colored. This particular layer will work with the colors that I've chosen. And I picked yellow and pink when I created it, but I'm going to actually go with like a yellow and a light blue, I think will be good. And then I'm going to hit X so that, and so basically this brush is designed to change colors, and it will give you more than the colors that you see in your foreground and background color. I have color jitters set, so it has saturation, which will be some are more saturated, some are less saturated. It has hue, and it has flipping between the two. And the hue is where you're going to get, and the saturation, so you're going to get some green stars, and we're getting some, probably have some, brighter blue stars. And when I had the pink, I would get red stars. So I'm going to add a small blur to these. So we're going to go to the filter, and I can keep the same setting as before, blur, motion blur, and I am also going to add these guys, give these guys a little bit of a glow. And in this case, I'm going to keep the same settings as before. So I'm just turning on outer glow. And I feel like with the colored ones, they can kind of start to take over. So I'm going to pull the opacity down a bit to make them look a little softer. So that's my colored stars. And all right, and now I've got twinkle stars. I love twinkle stars. I think they're fun. So here's what I've done, and you're going to see that some of my brushes are named stamped. And when it says stamped, that means that it's not meant for this. It's just meant to stamp a brush. Command C. So actually, I kind of liked the little bit of a yellow to it. So I'm going to pick a very soft yellow, but I'm going to go to my twinkle stars, and twinkle stars are designed to spread. And I'm just going to, let's just check the brush settings. I'm going to pull them down a little bit smaller. Command C to remove them. There we go. Those might be a little too small. Bring them up a bit. So, sometimes you're going to want to play there. That's good. And I'm going to actually pull some back up and get a few large twinkle stars. Am I still on twinkle stars? Yeah, I am. They're just not twinkling. There. Ooh, that's a little big. So my machine is a little underpowered, and it will sometimes give me a lot of issues, and it's really annoying. I just want a few little twinkle stars. There we go. Now, see how this allows, it does a cluster of stars, and it gives me our twinkles in the sky, and I like a little twinkle. And I'm changing the sizes. There we go. Now we've got some larger twinkle stars. I personally think they're a bit too sharp, but I'm not going to give these guys a motion blur. I'm going to give these guys a little bit of a Gaussian blur. They just look a little bit softer. That's way too much. Bring it down until because I still want to see my little edges of my twinkle. So that looks pretty good. These were really fun little stars to make. So the reason I do the twinkle stars, which you can scatter, And the stamped stars is because with the twinkle star, it can be hard to place a star in exactly where you want because I've got all these jitters going on and things are moving. But if you just want to say, I want a little star right here, you can just stick a little star right there, which looks kind of cool, but I'm not going to leave it there. Okay, so I think that's enough stars, and I'm going to go ahead and close that, and we're going to go on to creating the Milky Way. Now for the Milky Way, it only made sense to make a stamped Milky Way. And I'm going to start with this kind of creamy color, and I'm going to make my brush really, really, really large. I'm on my own layer. I'm going to call it Milky Way. And I'm just going to give it a little click. And while it looks cool, it's way too sharp. So I'm going to give it a blur. Now something I could have made this brush with a blur, but the reason I didn't is I wanted to give anyone using it the option to have a sharper Milky Way depending on what's happening in their image. And the other thing I figured out is it really helps to do multiple layers of the Milky Way with different levels of blurs. So I'm going to put these into a group. I'm going to go to my second Milky Way. I'm going to make my brush smaller. And I'm going to pick like a really pretty little lavendery purpley color because I've noticed that the Milky Way tends to get a lot of purple in it. And I'm going to give that a click. And again, doesn't look very natural. Before I blur it, I'm just going to check something. And this is the thing. There is no one way to do anything. And so I can look at it. I'm going to leave it on screen mode and I'm still going to blur it. Filter blur. Gaussian blur. I'm going to probably use a little bit less blur than last time. This way it starts giving it some depth, so you've got some things that are a little bit more and some things that are a little bit less. I'm going to call this one purple. Now I'm going to add another layer, and I'm going to switch this to more of a yellow. And you know, I'm not an astro person, I'm an artist. So if there's people out here that know their stars and know these things a lot better than me, that's great. This is just about getting kind of a fun Milky Way effect. So there's my yellow, and I did a few stamps. And I'm going to blur this. Give it a good blur. I just want the look of the stars, and I really think that this one got a little overdone. So I'm going to bring back my opacity. There we go. And I just want one more little guy in here. It's a little bit brighter yellow because I've noticed that you tend to get a lot of yellow and purples. I'm going to make it small. I'm going to stamp it on top, and I'm going to play with my blend modes and see what screen looks pretty good. Overlay looks pretty good. I kind of like the overlay. And again, I'm going to give it a blur. A little less blur than the others. So we've got this little cluster of gold in there. So here it is. There's a whole lot more I could do to this image. And if I feel like my Milky Way is a little too bright in the sky, I can bring it down a little bit because it's probably going to look a little bit more like this. And there it is. So I really appreciate you watching, and I hope this has been educational for you. Leave comments if you have questions or you need to know how to do other things. I'm going to be doing more videos on the brushes. So I really find there's a lot of power in customizing Photoshop brushes and using the brushes that come with Photoshop. And they're a whole lot of fun, and you can really do some fun stuff with it. So this was my first one on stars.